We're now at the point where we need to remove the rotor, and this is one of those moments of truth that you'll run into. You need to fit the wrench to it and brace it. The highway pegs here are a handy place to brace it. If you don't have those, you can brace it underneath the foot peg bracket. Getting this bolt off can be pretty tough because the torque that it's put on with is pretty huge. So you're going to need a breaker bar and need to hold all this well braced and support the bike. And pull. This is one of those times when it's good to have a buddy to help hold everything. There we go. The next thing we're going to do is insert the rotor puller, and my experience with getting these things off ranges from it basically falls off to it's almost impossible to get off. Because this thing can be on really tight, you need to put a lot of grease on the bolt, and that will help things slide around because this is a brute force operation. So you want a good dab of grease on the end, and then you want to have the threads well greased up. So you put a band of grease around the bolt that's 3/8 of a half an inch or so that you've got good lubrication. And as I say, sometimes this will just come off real easy, and other times it is a nightmare. Let's see how this one is. To remove the rotor, you need to brace the wrench either against the highway peg or underneath the foot peg. And this one is just popping right off, probably because it hasn't really been run since I put it on last. But this can be quite difficult to get off. But once it pops, it just falls off. Once you get it to move a few thousandths of an inch, it just falls off. And then we pull it straight out. Now, these are critical surfaces here, so you don't want to get these dirty, you don't want to nick them, so you want to take good care of these two mating surfaces because their purpose is to wedge together, and that's what the keyway here is, merely to properly orient everything, but the real strength is in the wedging action on this crankshaft and the torque of the bolt. So I'm going to set this over on the table so it stays clean. Okay, now we're at the point where we need to remove the inner case. Of course, this is the doohickey here, and you can see that I've got the aftermarket doohickey in place, and I've got the torsion spring installed. So now we're going to go and remove this inner case. But before we do that, I want to show you what happens when you make the adjustment to the doohickey. As you can see, since I just adjusted it, this chain here is good and tight. This is the back run. This is where all the slack occurs. Okay. I put a little bit of slack in the chain here, and you can see the slack in the back run here. This is what causes the rattling sound when the chain adjustment is not correct. So I'm going to go ahead and crack off the bolt, and you can watch the doohickey do its job. You see it move there? I'm going to take the inner case off now, but there are a couple of things to note. One is that there is a bolt right here that is easy to forget, and what I like to do is take that bolt out first and then tag it. The reason I tag it and put it in my tray is so that I don't forget it later on. It makes it very obvious, and I know what it's for, and I won't forget it. And that's the voice of experience, okay? When you pull this case off, it wants to pull the shaft that the doohickey is attached to out. In the back of the idler, the eccentric idler back here, is a thrust washer. And as that shaft comes out and the idler wants to come out, the thrust washer will fall off the back, go down a hole, and land inside the crankcase. And if you don't see it happen, you won't know it happened. It's a fairly heavy washer, so it's not likely to do any damage. Not likely, but it's possible. But the real problem is that then you don't have the right amount of end play on the eccentric and everything, and so stuff kind of rattles around, and it's a bad situation. So as we pull this off, we're going to want to make sure that that shaft doesn't come out. So I'm going to start removing the bolts, and I will be back when I've got them all out. To remove the inner case, we want to start by placing our thumb against the starter gear shaft and popping it out a little bit. There's an O-ring inside there that seals against the starter motor, and that can be a little bit sticky. So that makes life easier, and it's an easy way to crack the case off. And then we want to remove the doohickey itself. Now you remember I talked about a washer that could be in here if you're working on a used bike and you're not sure that the doohickey's been done or not. This washer comes with the kit, and if you were to pull that bolt out before removing the outer case and everything, this could roll around, get lost. I mean, it should stay in here, but definitely if you pull it out, this is going to roll off, and you're going to have to pull the case off to get it put back right, or you're going to have the thing rolling around in your engine. So now that we've got that loose, we can hold the case and slide the doohickey off, and I will pull my torsion spring out there, and we'll set that all aside. We'll take a look at this in a minute, and I'll show you how you can tell if you've got an aftermarket doohickey in your engine or not. All right, so it's time for the case to come off. We've cracked it off here, and as I said, we do not want this shaft to come out ever. And so I'm going to place a Phillips screwdriver against it, and then pull against the case and loosen it up, and then start working it off. And there she be. Okay. When we were talking about doing the doohickey adjustment, I mentioned that a good idea is to have the engine at top dead center. And this is the reason why. These are the counterbalancer weights. There's a similar one on the other side of the engine, and there's one up here in the transmission. If they're in this position, then they can put a little bit of tension into the chain. You can see this is free to move, and if there is some slack in the chain, then this can have some influence on the tension in here. It's not huge, but it can be there. And what we're asking the spring to do is to overcome whatever effect this thing is having on the adjustment. And by having the engine at top dead center, we can take these weights out of the equation. At top dead center, the piston is at the top of its stroke, and these are at the bottom of their stroke obviously to counterbalance the movement of the piston. When they're at the bottom, as they are in top dead center, then they can have no effect whatsoever on the tension in the chain, and all that the adjustment has to overcome is whatever slack is in the chain itself. And as I said, there's no influence from these weights, and I'll show you what they look like when the engine is at top dead center.